So in the last few videos, I talked about how I learn new content and the system that I use to maintain that understanding. In the next few videos, I'm going to talk about the high-level principles that enable that to work effectively. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is a method for prioritizing that work. And one technique I'm going to talk about in particular, which I think demonstrates a lot of these principles, is something which I'm going to call the triple folded sheet technique. I don't know, this might already have its own name, I'm not too sure, but this is a technique that I came across on some kind of productivity blog. I think it might have been Tim Ferriss, but essentially the idea is pretty simple. So the idea is that you take a sheet of paper and you fold it in half 3 times, and that will give you a small sheet of paper approximately this size. And what you then do on this sheet of paper is you will write down the 6 tasks that you want to achieve in any particular day. And you can do this at any time. I typically do it at the evening before I go to sleep. I think some people might prefer to do it in the morning, but basically what I will do is I will write out 6 bullet points and I'll think, what are the 6 top things that I want to cover today or tomorrow, whenever you're doing it for. I'll then write out those priorities and I'll give them a ranking from 1st down to 6th. And the idea is that when you then have free time to work on what you want to work on, you will take out this sheet of paper from your pockets and you will look at what number 1 priority is and you'll just work on that one until it's done. Then you'll look at number 2, work on that, etc., and see how far you get. And it might be the case that on a particular day you do 3 bullet points, which then is great because you've done your top 3 priorities for the day. Some days you might have a super productive day and do 5 or 6, although in my experience those tend to be fairly rare. Or it might be the case, what I find sometimes is if there's a day when I'm feeling super tired and not motivated, I will just focus on that first point and getting that done. And then as long as I get that done, then it can feel like a relatively productive day. Because those are the kinds of days where I would sometimes be tempted just to sack it off. I find having this really helps me to actually just get down and do that task. So I personally found that if I set a rigid schedule of saying that at this time I wanted to do this, and then this time I wanted to do this, to set up my whole day, I would almost never be able to stick to that. Because if something just took slightly longer than I expected, then it would push everything else out. And if there was something that I then actually wanted to spend a bit more time on, then I couldn't because of that schedule, and then that also didn't really work. Instead, I found what worked is if I have my priorities, then I will just work through those priorities in order, and it might take an hour, it might take a few hours to cover a topic or get a task done, but that's the best way for me to use my time. And actually, if there was only one productivity tip that you were going to try from all of these videos, I would 100% recommend it to be this one because for me, this technique was unreasonably effective. And I don't know why that's the case. I don't know if it hacks into some sort of psychological mechanism because it forces you to keep on prioritizing things and you get a little dopamine kick when you cross something off the list. I'm not too sure, but just for me, this was an absolute game changer. I first heard about it about 5 years ago or so, and initially I kind of implemented it on and off, but then when I realized how effective it was, I just stuck with it, and I've pretty much done it every day for the last couple of years. And one thing I really like about this approach is just how flexible it is depending on the type of work that you're doing in your life at that period of time. So if, for example, you're revising for exams, then I found this technique can be a very useful alternative to rigid study timetables. And the approach that I would typically take is I would think of the different subjects that I'm studying. So for example, in medicine, in my first year, I studied anatomy, biochemistry, and physiology. Within each of those subjects, I would think, what is the top topic that I want to learn? And in order to do that, I would look at the topic and see which of these am I least comfortable with. So then on my list, I would have the topic from each subject that I'm least comfortable with. So therefore, I'm prioritizing well what topics I want to cover, and I'm also getting a nice spread of the different subjects that I need to cover. And it's also flexible because let's say that you're learning a lot of new content at a particular period of time. So then rather than having topics you want to refresh, you might have a mix of new topics and topics that you're going to review, in my case, based on a spaced repetition based system. So what that would look like for me is that when I'm deciding what 6 points I want to include, I'll put a recent topic that I covered that I want to initially develop that understanding of. Then I would also look at my spaced repetition document and see what topics do I need to review, and then I'd put those as other bullet points on the sheet of paper. And likewise, I also found this technique was very useful when I was working as a doctor because rather than content that I was trying to study, I would put tasks that I need to do. So throughout the last 2.5 years while working as a doctor, there's various side projects that I've been involved with, and there'll always be tasks related to those. So I'd put them on that sheet, and then if there was a moment of time during the day when I had a free period, I would just whip out the sheet, look at what's next on the list, and then just start kind of working down those, and then maybe I'd go back to work, and then in the evening I'd get home and I'd be on point 2 or 3, and then I'd work on those that evening. And I also found it helpful because I could tailor my tasks to the particular day that I have coming up. So if, for example, I have a day where I know I have a lot of free time, then I'll typically put a number 1 task as something like a warm-up activity, and then I'll put number 2 to be my big focused task of the day, which might be something I'm going to spend a lot of hours doing, but that would be my top priority, and I'll just focus on trying to achieve that in the day. Whereas if I had a day where I knew it was going to be a bit more stop-starty, so maybe if I'm working as a doctor and I know that I'm only going to have some small windows of time throughout the day to do other work, then I would be thinking, well, what are the tasks that I can prioritize into those slots? Maybe it's something that I can achieve in 30 minutes or 45 minutes, and I'll just try and fit those in as I can. So yeah, I could probably go on about this for a long time. As I said, it's probably my favorite productivity hack tip that I've come across. I have a feeling that this video might already be quite long, so I'm not going to talk about this too much more. But before we finish, I just want to add one other minor modification that I've made to this, which is that as well as the front page where I write my 6 tasks, I started using the inside page to write kind of small admin type tasks that I need to do. So for example, if I remembered that I needed to, as you can see, do my laundry, then I will write a note on here to at some point during the day do my laundry. And actually I haven't crossed that off yet because I didn't get around to doing it, but the principle still stands. If there's some sort of small admin task, or maybe there's a message that I need to send, like I think I need to send someone a WhatsApp message about something or an email, then I'll just put it on here. They're not a top priority task, but then at some point, if I am free and I'm by a computer, then I will just whip this out and usually just go down and kind of cross these off, or I'll bear in mind that I need to do my laundry and try and find a time to then do that. And I find it somewhat comforting to know that in my pocket I have a list of all the stuff that I need to do, because then I don't have to worry that I need to do this or that later on. I can just remember that it's stored in my pocket, as long as I don't lose that sheet of paper, which is also important to be careful about. And for me personally, I prefer it on a sheet of paper rather than a phone, just because I tend to get distracted if I have to whip out a phone to write a to-do. I'm always gonna see a new notification and then probably check that and waste a bit of time. This is nice. A bit of digital minimalism. I can just whip it out, make a quick note, put it back in my pocket. But yeah, that's the approach that I take in order to prioritize the work that I'm going to do. In the next video, I'm going to talk about how I make incremental improvements to my study technique over time.